a baby boy just 6 months old named Mason Castellano, the only son of Damian Castellano, the most powerful mafia boss on the east coast of America, whose empire was worth over $500 million, and whose name made even the FBI tread carefully, was wasting away uncontrollably, despite receiving the finest medical care that unlimited money and absolute power could command in New York City. And his father, a man who had never begged anyone for anything in his 36 years of life, had desperately brought the child to more than 15 different specialists, from gastroenterologists at Johns Hopkins to endocrinologists at Mayo Clinic, from nutritionists at Cleveland Clinic to immunologists at the most exclusive private practices in Manhattan, spending over $2 million in medical consultations. Yet not a single one of them could explain why this baby, who ate normally and showed no symptoms of any disease, kept losing weight day after day until his tiny ribs began to protrude, and his once chubby cherubic face became gaunt, deathly pale. But when Dr. Amelia Harper, a 27-year-old pediatrician who worked at Brooklyn General Hospital in one of the poorest neighborhoods of the city, a woman drowning in $250,000 of student debt, who sometimes slept in the on-call room because her studio apartment was too small and moldy, was hired almost by accident after the baby's nanny remembered how this exhausted young doctor had once saved her own son's life. She saw something that all those expensive physicians from elite private clinics had completely overlooked. Something that had nothing to do with advanced medical technology or complex diagnostic procedures, but rather with basic human observation and the willingness to look beyond what seemed obvious. What Dr. Amelia discovered inside that fortress of a mansion, guarded by armed men and surrounded by wealth beyond imagination, horrified her so deeply that she could barely believe what her own eyes were witnessing. And what she did next not only saved Mason's life, but also exposed a devastating truth about this powerful crime family that would shake its very foundations, prove that neither money nor power nor fear could buy true love or protect the innocent from the evil that sometimes lives within one's own home, and reveal that sometimes guardian angels do not come with wings and halos, but with worn-out stethoscopes, dark circles under their eyes, and the unbreakable courage to see what others refuse to see. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from and let us begin this story. If stories like this touch your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because what happened between the Mafia King and the hospital doctor will prove that even the darkest souls can find redemption through love. Dr. Amelia Harper was in the middle of her third consecutive night shift at Brooklyn General Hospital when the first call came, the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday night, and the pediatric emergency department was packed as always, mothers clutching their children and crying uncontrollably, kids burning with high fevers, the monitor machines beeping nonstop, the smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat, and the anxiety of dozens of families waiting in the narrow hallway. Amelia had just finished examining a 3-year-old girl with pneumonia when the phone in her coat pocket vibrated. She glanced at the screen and her heart tightened when she saw the number from Mount Sinai, where her younger sister was being treated. She asked permission to step into the hallway, her trembling hand pressing the answer button. The voice on the other end belonged to Lily's attending physician, and what he said made Amelia's legs feel like they might give out. Lily's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Her blood cancer had progressed to stage 4. The bone marrow transplant surgery had to be done within 2 weeks, or it would be too late. The cost was $150,000, and the hospital needed a deposit of at least 50% before they could proceed. Amelia leaned back against the peeling hallway wall, closed her eyes, and tried to hold back the tears rising in her throat. Lily wasn't her biological sister, but they'd met at the orphanage when Amelia was 10 and Lily was only 5, a thin little girl with wide, frightened eyes who'd just been returned by her second adoptive family because they only wanted a healthier child. Amelia had promised she'd protect Lily, had worked like a madwoman for 17 years to pay for her schooling, and now, when Lily needed her most, she had nothing but $250,000 in debt and a bank account with less than $800 left. She opened her phone, stared at the number in her banking app, then stared at the rent bill for the damp studio apartment she still hadn't been able to pay for 2 months, and she wondered if fate was testing her or punishing her for some sin she didn't even know she'd committed. Her phone vibrated again, this time from an unfamiliar number. Amelia almost didn't answer, but something made her press the button. The voice on the other end was a young woman, shaking and full of worry. "Dr. Harper, my name is Maria Santos. You might not remember me, but 2 years ago you saved my son. He had severe pneumonia, and the other doctors kept insisting it was just an ordinary cold. You were the only one who insisted on an X-ray and found the illness in time." Amelia tried to remember. There were too many patients, too many faces. But the name Maria Santos sounded familiar. "I remember," Amelia said. "How can I help you, Maria?" "Doctor, I'm working as a nanny for a family in Manhattan. They have a 6-month-old baby who's very sick. They've taken him to more than 15 different doctors, the best doctors in America, but no one can figure out what's wrong. The baby keeps getting thinner every day, and I'm afraid he won't make it." Amelia frowned. If they'd already seen the best doctors, then why call me? I'm just a doctor at a public hospital. I don't have a private clinic. I don't have modern equipment. Maria was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Because you're different, doctor. You really look at the patient. You truly care. And I feel like something isn't right in that house. But I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how to prove it. I only know the baby needs real help." Amelia wanted to refuse. She was too exhausted, too terrified for Lily, too drained after 3 nights without sleep. But something in Maria's voice, that desperation, that real fear, wouldn't let her say no. "Who is this family?" Amelia asked. Maria drew in a deep breath, then said, "The Castellano family. Dr. Damien Castellano." Amelia went still. Everyone in New York knew that name. The most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast of America. The man, even the FBI treated cautiously. The man people said could make anyone disappear without leaving a trace. And now his nanny was asking a broke doctor from Brooklyn to come save his son. "Give me the address," Amelia heard herself say. "I'll come after my shift ends, but I can't promise anything." When she hung up, Amelia didn't know she'd just agreed to step into an entirely different world. A world of power, secrets, and danger, where the truth was more terrifying than any illness she'd ever treated. Amelia finished her shift at 8 in the evening, after 12 straight hours of examining patients, writing prescriptions, calming anxious mothers, and trying to keep sick children stable through the night. She changed out of her sweat-soaked scrubs, pulled on an old coat with worn shoulders, and stepped into the parking lot behind the hospital where her 2003 Honda Civic waited like a loyal old friend. The car had nearly 300,000 miles on the odometer. The faded paint had peeled in several places. The right door needed to be slammed twice before it would open, and the air conditioning had died last summer. But it still ran, and that was all Amelia needed. She typed the address Maria had sent into her phone with the cracked screen, and when the location popped up on the map, she couldn't help letting out a long sigh. The Upper East Side of Manhattan, one of the most expensive neighborhoods not only in New York but in all of America, where the price of a single apartment could buy an entire row of houses in Brooklyn. Amelia drove across the Brooklyn Bridge, watching Manhattan's skyscrapers glitter in the night like a lavish paradise she'd never belonged to. When she turned into the streets of the Upper East Side, the difference was so stark it was almost painful. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and Mercedes Maybachs were parked along both sides of the road, gleaming under the streetlights like precious jewels, and her rusty Honda Civic looked out of place among them like a duckling that had wandered into a flock of swans. The mansions here didn't resemble anything Amelia had ever seen, each one its own architectural statement, hidden behind tall iron fences and perfectly trimmed gardens. But when she reached the address Maria had given her, Amelia realized all those other mansions were merely the homes of ordinary rich people. This was the fortress of a king. The Castellano family estate sat at the end of a private drive, surrounded by a stone wall at least 4 meters high, with security cameras perched along the top, turning slowly like eyes that never slept. The main gate was a pair of massive iron doors etched with intricate patterns, and behind them Amelia could see at least 3 men in black suits standing watch, their posture making it clear they weren't ordinary guards. Amelia stopped her car at the gate, rolled down her window, and was about to press the buzzer when one of the men strode forward, the gate's lights cutting across an angular face marked by a long scar that ran from his temple down to his cheekbone. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" His voice was cold as steel, not a question so much as a command. "I'm Dr. Amelia Harper. Maria Santos called me to examine the baby." Amelia answered, her voice steady even as her heart began to pound harder than usual. The man looked her up and down, his gaze sweeping over the battered old car, the coat with worn shoulders, the brown hair hastily tied back with a few loose strands falling out, then stopping on her green eyes that met his without a flicker of fear. "Get out of the car," he ordered. Amelia stepped out, and immediately 2 other men moved in, one searching her bag while the other ran a metal detector over her body. They pulled out her stethoscope, her thermometer, a few sample vials of medication, and her phone with the cracked screen, inspecting each item with meticulous care, as if she were a potential terrorist rather than a doctor exhausted after 12 hours on her feet. The man with the scar watched the entire process, gray eyes never leaving her for a single second. "You're a doctor," he said, his voice still cold but edged with something like curiosity. "You don't look like a doctor." "And what does a doctor look like?" Amelia shot back, unshaken. "Not like someone who's about to pass out from lack of sleep and hunger," the man replied. Amelia almost laughed. It was the first time all day anyone had noticed how tired she truly was. "I'm Viktor Petrov," the man said. "I'm in charge of security for this family, and I'll be watching you the entire time you're here. If you do anything suspicious, you'll never leave this place." "I'm here to save a child," Amelia said, "not to do anything suspicious. Now can you take me to the patient, or are we going to stand out here all night?" Victor studied her a moment longer, and then something flickered in his gray eyes, maybe surprise, or a sliver of respect for the courage of this small woman. He nodded to the gate guard, and the massive iron doors slowly swung open, revealing a stone-paved drive leading to an enormous 3-story mansion, every window blazing with light as if no one inside could sleep. Victor led Amelia through the heavy oak front doors, and the instant she stepped inside, she felt as if she'd crossed into an entirely different world. The main hall of the mansion was as large as the entire first floor of the hospital where she worked. The floor paved in pristine white Italian marble with gray veins running through it like frozen rivers. The ceiling soaring overhead with a massive crystal chandelier casting warm light over oil paintings and sculptures that Amelia was certain each cost more than her entire lifetime of a doctor's salary. But she didn't have time to admire the opulence, because Victor guided her across the hall, turned into a long corridor lined with closed doors on both sides, and stopped in front of a set of double doors at the far end. He knocked twice, short and sharp, then opened the doors without waiting for an answer, and Amelia stepped into an office whose luxury made her catch her breath. Walnut bookcases ran along both walls from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked as if they'd been around for hundreds of years. A massive ebony desk sat before a wide glass window overlooking a garden lit to a shimmering glow, and behind that desk sat a man who, with a single glance, made Amelia understand why this entire city trembled at the sound of his name. Damian Castellano didn't look like what she'd imagined a mafia boss would be. There was nothing crude about him, nothing openly savage. Instead, he was a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit, black hair slightly disheveled as if he'd run his hand through it again and again during the night, and eyes the color of cold steel fixed on her with an intensity that would have made most people lower their gaze. But Amelia wasn't most people. She'd looked death in the eyes too many times in the hospital to fear a man, no matter how powerful he was. "So this is the doctor Maria found," Damian said, his voice low and cold, his gray eyes sliding from her hastily tied hair down to her worn old sneakers. "You look more like an intern than a doctor, and you think you can do what 15 of the top specialists in America couldn't." Amelia felt heat rush to her face, but she swallowed her anger, keeping her voice steady as she replied, "I don't think I can do anything, but I can try, and if you keep judging doctors by how they look instead of what they can do, that might be why your son is still sick." The room seemed to freeze. Victor, behind Amelia, drew in a sharp breath, and she could feel his shock that anyone would dare speak to Damian Castellano that way. Damian rose from behind the desk, and Amelia realized he was taller than she'd thought, at least 1.85 meters. His steps slow but threatening as he moved toward her, stopping less than a single pace away. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he asked, his voice light as a feather but dangerous as a blade. "I'm talking to a father whose child is sick," Amelia answered, not stepping back even as her heart pounded like a war drum. "And that father can keep wasting time asking me pointless questions, or he can let me examine his child. Your choice." Damian stared at her, gray eyes drilling into her green ones, as if searching for any hint of fear, but he didn't find it. One moment passed, then another, and finally something shifted in his gaze. Not anger, but something Amelia couldn't read. "You have 1 week," Damian said, his voice still cold but less overtly threatening. 1 week to figure out what's wrong with my son. If you fail, you'll leave this place and you'll never be allowed to come back." "And if I find it?" Amelia asked. "If you find it," Damian said, "then I'll owe you a favor. And a favor from Damian Castellano is worth more than anything you can imagine. But let me make one thing clear," he went on, stepping closer until Amelia could catch the faint scent of expensive cologne. "If you do anything that harms my son, Whether by accident or on purpose, you'll wish you'd never been born. Do you understand? Amelia swallowed hard. This was the first time she truly felt the danger radiating from him. A danger that didn't come from the threat itself, but from the certainty that he was fully capable of carrying it out. I understand, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. And I want you to understand one thing too. I'm a doctor. My job is to save people, especially children, so you don't need to threaten me to make me do my best. I'm going to do it no matter who you are. Damien held her gaze a long moment more, then turned to Victor and said, Take her up to Mason's room, and tell Natasha to come down to see me. Victor led Amelia up to the second floor by way of a curved marble staircase, each of her footsteps echoing through the mansion's heavy silence. They passed down a long hallway lined with family photographs, and Amelia caught a brief glimpse of Damien's wedding picture, with a beautiful blonde woman, but she didn't have time to look closer, because Victor stopped at a door at the end of the hall. The young master's room, he said, then opened it. Maria's inside. Amelia stepped in and immediately felt the room's strange contrast. This was the most luxurious nursery she'd ever seen in her life, with an intricately carved white oak crib that probably cost as much as her entire year's salary. Walls painted a soft pastel blue, toys and stuffed animals packed onto shelves. A moon-shaped nightlight casting a warm golden glow. Everything perfect, as if it had been lifted from an interior design magazine. But the baby lying in that expensive crib was the exact opposite of the perfection around him. Mason Castellano at 6 months old looked as if he were only 3 months. His tiny body so thin and fragile Amelia could see each rib pressing up beneath pale, delicate skin. A face that had once been chubby now hollowed out, with sunken eyes staring up at the ceiling in weary exhaustion, and little hands reduced to skin over bone gripping the crib rail as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to life. Amelia's heart tightened. She'd seen many sick children through her years at a public hospital, but something about Mason made her want to cry. Maria stood beside the crib, the young Puerto Rican nanny's face worn with worry and fatigue. It was clear she'd spent many nights awake caring for this child. Doctor, Harper, Maria said, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. I don't know what to do anymore. Amelia nodded and moved to the crib, gently placing her hand on Mason's forehead to check his temperature. The baby wasn't feverish. She took out her stethoscope and listened to his heart and lungs. His heart rate was normal. His lungs were clear. She checked his eyes, his mouth, his throat. There were no signs of infection. She palpated his belly. There was no unusual hardness or mass. Clinically, Mason looked like a completely healthy baby, except he was slowly dying of malnutrition, and no one could explain why. How does he eat? Amelia asked Maria. Normally, Maria answered. He takes formula, about 150 milliliters each feeding, 4 to 5 times a day. He doesn't refuse the bottle. He doesn't vomit or spit up. What about digestion? Any diarrhea? Maria hesitated for a second before replying, Yes, sometimes, especially at night. Amelia was about to ask more when the door opened and a woman walked in. The woman from the wedding photo Amelia had glimpsed in the hallway. Natasha Castellano at 28 was coldly beautiful like a porcelain doll. Platinum blonde hair curled to perfection. Skin as white as milk without a single mark. Icy blue eyes assessing Amelia with a detached chill. And a fitted, expensive black dress hugging her slender frame, as if she were heading to a party instead of standing in a room with a gravely ill child. So you're the new doctor, Natasha said, her voice sweet but edged with something sharp underneath. My husband says you think you can help Mason. I'm going to do my best, Amelia replied, studying the woman in front of her and noticing something strange. Natasha stood at least 2 meters from her son's crib. She didn't come closer to look at him or touch him. Her gaze skimmed over Mason in a careless glance, as if the baby were a decorative object in the room rather than her sick child. Can you tell me about Mason's eating and daily routine? Amelia asked. Natasha began to explain, and Amelia noticed she spoke in great detail. Too much detail, as if she'd memorized a presentation. How many milliliters? How many times a day? How many hours of sleep? Everything perfect and precise down to each number. But something was missing from Natasha's voice. Worry. Amelia had met hundreds of mothers with sick children, and they all shared one thing, a level of fear that bordered on panic, terror visible in every look and every word. But Natasha didn't. She was calm in a way that felt unnatural, cold to the point of near indifference. Thank you for telling me, Amelia said. I'll need to stay for a few days to observe Mason, if that isn't a problem. Natasha shrugged. Do whatever you want. then turned and left the room without looking back at her son even once. When the door closed, Maria stepped closer to Amelia, her voice a whisper as if she were afraid someone might hear. "Doctor, I want to tell you something, but I don't know if I should." "Go ahead," Amelia encouraged her. Maria glanced around, then said, "I don't know how to explain it, but every time Mrs. Castellano feeds Mason at night, he screams and has terrible diarrhea. But when I feed him, there's no problem. I told the other doctors, but they said I was worrying too much. They said I'm not a specialist, so I shouldn't make wild guesses." A chill slid down Amelia's spine, her doctor's instincts sounding an alarm she still couldn't put a name to. "Have you noticed anything else?" Amelia asked. Maria hesitated, then said, "Sometimes the bottles misses. Castellano mixes look different from the ones I make, like there's some kind of sediment at the bottom, but I haven't dared ask because I'm afraid she'll think I'm insulting her." Amelia looked down at Mason, the baby already drifting into sleep in the crib, his expression so painfully exhausted, and inside her, a terrible suspicion began to take shape. A suspicion she prayed was wrong. Amelia was assigned a luxurious guest room right beside Mason's room. Victor said it was Damien's order so she could monitor the baby at any time. The room was spacious, with a king-size bed dressed in white silk sheets, heavy velvet curtains sealing off the windows, and a private bathroom lined in glossy black marble, everything more opulent than anywhere Amelia had ever slept in her life. But she didn't have the mind to enjoy any of it. Maria's words kept echoing in her head like a troubling refrain. Every time Mrs. Castellano feeds Mason at night, he screams and has diarrhea. Amelia lay on the bed, eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling decorated with intricate patterns, and she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 11 at night. The mansion had sunk into silence, leaving only the steady tick of an old clock somewhere out in the hallway. Amelia sat up, quietly opened her door, and stepped into the corridor. She crossed the few steps to Mason's room and gently pushed the door open. Maria was sitting in the armchair beside the crib, her head bobbing with sleep after a long day. "You should go rest," Amelia whispered. "I'll watch Mason tonight." Maria looked up, her eyes red from exhaustion. "But you need rest too, doctor." "I can't sleep," Amelia said. "You go. If anything happens, I'll call you." Maria hesitated, then stood. "Thank you, doctor," she said, and left the room. Amelia sat in the chair Maria had just vacated and watched Mason sleeping in the crib, his breathing soft but slightly labored. It twisted something inside her. She stayed there in the dark, lit only by the gentle glow of the moon-shaped nightlight, and she waited. An hour passed, then 2. Amelia began to nod off, but she fought the drowsiness, took a sip of cold water from the bottle she'd brought, and kept watching. The clock read 3 in the morning when she heard light footsteps in the hallway. Instinctively, Amelia rose and slipped back into a dark corner of the room, where the shadow of the large wardrobe could hide her completely. The door opened without a sound, and Natasha Castellano stepped in like a ghost in a white silk nightgown. In her hand was a bottle, but it wasn't one of the bottles Maria had prepared and stored in the refrigerator. This was a different one, a bottle Natasha had brought from somewhere else. Amelia held her breath, watching from the darkness as Natasha moved to Mason's crib and gently lifted the baby up. Mason stirred faintly, his eyes still closed, and Natasha placed the bottle's nipple into his mouth. The baby began to feed on instinct, and Natasha stood there, her face expressionless in the dim light of the nightlight, watching him drink with none of the tenderness or worry a normal mother would show. About 10 minutes later, when the bottle was empty, Natasha placed Mason back in the crib, then silently left the room the way she'd come. Amelia stayed frozen in the dark, heart hammering, and waited. She didn't have to wait long. Less than half an hour after Natasha left, Mason began to writhe in the crib, his tiny face tightening in pain, and then the baby let out a piercing scream, a cry that tore through the mansion's quiet night. Amelia rushed to the crib and lifted Mason, and immediately she smelled it, the sharp stench of watery stool. She laid him on the changing table, and what she saw made her heart feel as if it were being crushed. Mason's diaper was soaked with yellow-green liquid, diarrhea so severe the skin on his bottom had already flushed red with irritation. Amelia changed his diaper, trying to soothe him while her thoughts spun out of control. A healthy baby couldn't have diarrhea this severe after an ordinary bottle of formula. Maria had been right. There was something in the bottle Natasha brought, something the mother was giving her child every night, late in the dark, when no one was watching. Amelia held Mason against her chest, the baby still sobbing, and she murmured comfort into his hair while a terrifying thought took shape in her mind. a thought she didn't want to believe and yet couldn't deny. Someone in this house was hurting Mason, and that someone might be his own mother. The next morning, when the first sunlight slipped through the gap in the velvet curtains, Amelia had been awake for a long time. In truth, she'd barely slept at all after what she'd witnessed the night before. Mason had fallen back asleep after she soothed him for nearly an hour. But Amelia's mind couldn't settle. She needed proof. She needed to know for certain that what she suspected was real, not something her exhaustion had conjured. Amelia left Mason's room when Maria arrived to take over at 6 a.m. She told the young nanny she needed to go down to the kitchen for some water, but in reality she had a different purpose. She walked along the hallway, trying to remember the direction Natasha had gone after leaving Mason's room last night, and in the end she found a door that led down to the kitchen and laundry area on the lower level. The Castellano mansion's kitchen was the size of a 5-star restaurant, with gleaming walnut cabinets, a black granite island, and every modern appliance Amelia had only ever seen in magazines. But she didn't care about any of that luxury. Her eyes swept the kitchen, searching for what she needed, and she found it in the trash bin beneath the sink. The baby bottle. Amelia crouched, used a paper towel so she wouldn't touch it directly, and lifted it to examine under the light. Her heart beat faster when she saw what Maria had described. A cloudy white sediment settled at the bottom. Not the usual formula residue, but something else, something that shouldn't have been in a 6-month-old baby's bottle. Amelia pulled a small test tube from her pocket. She always carried a few basic medical tools on her, and carefully scraped a bit of the white sediment into the tube, then sealed it. She also used a small syringe to draw out the remaining milk in the bottle, about 20 milliliters, enough for testing. She tucked the samples into her coat pocket and left the kitchen quickly, her heart pounding as if she'd just committed a crime. On her way back to Mason's room, Amelia passed the mansion's security room, the door slightly ajar, revealing dozens of screens showing camera feeds from all over the house. She paused, pretending to retie her shoelace, and glanced inside. One of the security men was seated at the monitors, but he was absorbed in his phone and didn't notice her. Amelia studied the screens and realized one of them displayed Mason's room, the camera angle looking down from above the crib. But what caught her attention was the small text flickering in the corner, the timestamp, and she realized the time jumped from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m, as if the 2 hours in between didn't exist. The camera in Mason's room was turned off from 2 to 4 every night. A cold shiver ran down Amelia's spine. This wasn't a coincidence. Natasha had entered Mason's room at 3 a.m, right in the window when the camera wasn't running. Someone had deliberately disabled the camera so no one would see what happened in the baby's room during those hours, and only 2 people had access to this house's security system, Damien and Natasha. Amelia hurried back to her room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the test tube holding the mysterious white sediment. She needed to send the sample for testing. She needed to know exactly what was being put into Mason's milk, but she had to do it without anyone in this house finding out. She pulled out her phone and called her closest colleague at Brooklyn Hospital, a lab technician named David, whom she trusted completely. "David, I need you to help me with something," Amelia said when he picked up. "I'm going to send you a sample. Can you test it and get me the results as soon as you can? But don't ask why and don't tell anyone." David hesitated for a second, then agreed. He knew Amelia wouldn't ask unless it truly mattered. Amelia ended the call, looked out the window at the Castellano mansion's garden glowing in the early sun, and she wondered what she was walking into, how dark this secret really was, and whether she'd have the courage to face the truth when it finally came to light. 2 days passed in a low, simmering tension as Amelia continued to observe Mason and record everything, from feeding times, the amount of milk, and the number of diarrhea episodes, to every moment Natasha appeared in the baby's room. She tried to act normal, examining Mason each day, speaking with Maria about the baby's condition, even exchanging a few polite words with Natasha whenever the woman stopped by her son's room. But Amelia didn't know Natasha had been watching her closely for a while. It was the afternoon of the 3rd day when everything began to shift. Amelia was sitting in Mason's room, writing in her small notebook, when she looked up and caught Natasha standing in the doorway, staring at her with eyes as cold as ice. "What are you writing, Doctor?" "Harper," Natasha asked, her voice sweet but edged with something sharp underneath. "Medical notes on Mason's condition," Amelia answered calmly, closing the notebook. "It's standard procedure when monitoring a patient." Natasha stepped into the room, her gaze never leaving Amelia. "I've noticed you walk around the house at strange hours. You seem interested in more than just my son's health." Amelia felt her heart speed up, but she kept her face unreadable. I'm a doctor. My job requires me to observe anything that might affect a patient's health, including the living environment and daily routine. Natasha studied her a long moment, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then she turned and left without saying another word. Amelia knew she was being targeted now. That night, as Amelia was getting ready for bed, there was a knock at her door. Victor stood outside, his face as cold as ever. "The boss wants to see you, right now." Amelia followed Victor downstairs, through the familiar corridors, to the door of Damien's office. This time, when she stepped inside, it wasn't only Damien. Natasha was there too, sitting in the chair across from her husband's desk, her eyes on Amelia with a look of triumph. Damien rose as Amelia entered, his face harder to read than ever, gray eyes cold as steel, but with something else hidden deep beneath that Amelia couldn't quite name. "My wife says you've been acting suspicious," Damien said, his voice low and slow. "She says you ask strange questions. You watch things in this house as if you're searching for something. Do you want to explain?" Amelia met Damien's gaze without flinching. "I'm doing my job. You hired me to find out why your son is sick, and to do that I have to observe everything, including things other people might not want me to see." Natasha sprang to her feet. What is she implying? What? That someone in this house is hurting Mason? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Amelia turned to Natasha, and for the first time she saw something flicker in those icy blue eyes. Not anger, but fear. "I'm not implying anything," Amelia said slowly. "I'm only saying I'm doing my job. And if Mrs. Castellano feels threatened by that, maybe she should ask herself why." The room seemed to freeze. Natasha opened her mouth to speak, but Damien lifted a hand to silence her. He stared at Amelia, gray eyes drilling into her as if he were trying to read every thought in her head. "Are you saying my wife is connected to my son's illness?" Damien asked, his voice so dangerous the air in the room felt thick. "I'm saying someone in this house is giving your son something that shouldn't be in the milk of a 6-month-old baby," Amelia answered, her voice steady even as her heart pounded wildly. "I don't have enough evidence yet to say who it is, but I'll find out, and when I do, you'll be the first to know." Natasha burst into tears, or at least pretended to. "I can't believe it. She dares to say things like that about me. Damien, you have to throw her out immediately." Damien didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching Amelia with an unreadable expression, and she felt as if he were weighing every word she'd spoken, every flicker on her face, every beat of her heart. Finally, he spoke. "You have 1 week. I already said it. If by then you have no proof for what you just implied, you'll leave this place and pray I'm generous enough to forget what you said." "I don't need a week," Amelia replied, turning to walk out. "I only need the truth, and the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how hard someone tries to bury it." That night Amelia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning with everything that had just happened in Damien's office. She knew she was walking a tightrope. On one side was the truth she had to uncover, on the other was the most powerful Mafia family on the east coast of America, and if she was wrong, if she couldn't prove what she suspected, she might never leave this mansion. The next morning, as she was changing Mason's diaper, her phone vibrated. A message from David in the lab. "The results are in. Call me now." Amelia felt her heart miss a beat. She handed Mason back to Maria and hurried into the hallway, finding a hidden corner before she called David. David's voice on the other end sounded tense and worried. "Amelia, the sample you sent me, where did you get it?" "Just tell me the results," Amelia said, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. David drew in a deep breath, then said, "That milk sample contains bisacatal, a laxative, at a dose 10 times higher than an adult dose. If a baby drinks this amount every day, the child will have constant diarrhea, dehydration, electrolyte loss, severe malnutrition, and if it continues, it can be fatal." Amelia leaned back against the wall, her legs threatening to buckle, even though she'd suspected it for a long time. Hearing it confirmed still felt like someone had punched her in the chest. Someone was poisoning a 6-month-old baby. Someone was slowly killing Mason Castellano inside his own home, right under the nose of the most powerful Mafia boss in America. "Amelia, you need to call the police," David said. "This is attempted murder." "Not yet," Amelia replied, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't have proof of who did this. I only have the milk sample. I need to catch them in the act." "Are you crazy?" David almost shouted. "You're in a Mafia house. If they know you're investigating them, they'll kill you." "I know," Amelia said. "But if I don't do anything, the baby will die, and I can't let that happen." She ended the call and stood alone in the silent hallway, feeling the weight of what she'd just learned settle onto her shoulders. Natasha Castellano, Mason's mother, was the only suspect. She was the one who fed him at night. She was the one who had the ability to disable the camera in Mason's room. She was the only one with the chance to slip the drug into the bottle without anyone knowing. But Amelia needed proof. She needed to catch Natasha putting the drug into the milk. She needed video. She needed images. She needed something undeniable to confront Damien and prove that his wife was killing their son. Amelia closed her eyes, drew in a deep breath to steady herself, and then she began to plan. She needed an ally inside this house. Someone with access to the security system. Someone she could trust. And only one name came to mind: Viktor Petrov. Amelia found Viktor in the security room that afternoon, when she knew Natasha was at the spa and Damien was meeting with men in black suits in his office. Viktor sat alone in front of the wall of screens, gray eyes sweeping across camera feeds from all over the mansion, and when she stepped in, he turned to look at her with guarded caution. "What do you need, Doctor?" "Harper?" Viktor asked, his voice cold but not openly hostile. "I need to talk to you," Amelia said, closing the door behind her. "About Mason." Viktor lifted an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Amelia drew in a deep breath and stepped closer. She knew this was the biggest gamble of her life. If she misjudged Viktor, if he reported her to Natasha or Damien, she'd lose her life. But she'd watched Viktor over the past days. She'd seen the way he looked at Mason whenever he passed the nursery. That rare softness on a face as hard as stone. She'd seen the way his jaw tightened when Mason cried at night. And she knew that even though Viktor was Damien's guard, he truly cared about that child. "I know who's making Mason sick," Amelia said bluntly, without circling around it. Viktor shot to his feet, gray eyes sharp and fixed on her. "What did you just say?" Amelia pulled the printed lab result from her pocket and handed it to Viktor. "I took a milk sample from the bottle Mrs. Castellano gives Mason at night and sent it for testing. The results show it contains bisacodyl, a laxative, at a dose 10 times higher than an adult dose." Viktor read the paper, and Amelia watched his face shift from skepticism to shock, and from shock into something like rage simmering beneath an icy surface. He looked up, his voice trembling with restraint. "You're saying Mrs. Castellano, Mason's mother, is poisoning her own son?" "I'm saying someone is putting medicine into Mason's milk," Amelia replied, "and the only person who mixes his bottle at night is Mrs. Castellano. She's also the one with the ability to shut off the camera in Mason's room from 2 in the morning to 4 in the morning every night. I checked." Viktor set the paper down on the desk, his hands curling into fists, the scar on his face twitching with the grind of his teeth. "Why are you telling me this instead of telling the boss?" "Because I don't have direct proof yet," Amelia answered. "I need to catch her putting the drug into the milk. And to do that, I need you to help me install a hidden camera in Mason's room, a camera she can't disable." Viktor fell silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the screens in front of him, where one of them showed Mason lying in the crib with Maria seated beside him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with resolve. "I've worked for Mr. Castellano since I was 20. He saved my life, gave me a purpose. I'd die for him if I had to." He turned to look at Amelia. "But Mason, that boy is the future of this family. He's everything the boss has. If someone is hurting him, no matter who it is, I'll never forgive it." Viktor walked to a locked cabinet in the corner, opened it, and took out a small device. "This is a wireless camera. The battery lasts 7 days. It connects directly to my phone. No one can turn it off except me." He handed it to Amelia. "Tonight I'll install it in Mason's room after Mrs. Castellano is asleep, and then we'll wait." Viktor installed the camera at midnight, when the entire mansion had sunk into sleep. He hid the tiny device inside a teddy bear on the toy shelf, the angle perfect, covering the entire crib and the formula mixing area in Mason's room. Amelia lay in her own room, her phone resting on her chest, the screen showing the live feed from the hidden camera, her eyes locked on every movement in the dark nursery, lit only by the faint glow of the moon-shaped nightlight. Maria had gone back to her room at 10 at night after feeding Mason his last bottle of the day. The baby slept peacefully in the crib, unaware that tonight would be the night that changed his fate. 1 hour passed, then 2. Amelia felt her eyelids grow heavy, but she didn't dare sleep. She drank cold, stale coffee from the cup on her bedside table and kept waiting. The clock on her phone read 2:47 in the morning when Mason's door slowly opened. Amelia jolted upright, heart pounding, eyes never leaving the phone screen. Natasha Castellano slipped into the room like a ghost in a white silk nightgown, blonde hair loose over her shoulders, her bare face looking pale under the dim light. She walked to the formula station in the corner, took out a clean bottle, and began mixing formula, her movements practiced as if she'd done it hundreds of times. Amelia held her breath, her finger pressing the record button on her phone, making sure every moment was saved. Natasha finished mixing the formula, then she stopped, looked around the room as if to make sure no one was there, and Amelia felt her blood turn to ice when she saw what happened next. Natasha pulled a small white bottle from the pocket of her nightgown, opened the cap, and poured a measure of white powder into the baby bottle, then shook it until the powder dissolved completely. Amelia wanted to scream, wanted to run into Mason's room and snatch the bottle away, but she knew she had to let Natasha finish so she'd have evidence that couldn't be denied. Natasha moved to Mason's crib and gently lifted him, and Mason stirred awake, sleepy eyes lifting to his mother's face. Natasha placed the bottle nipple into his mouth, and the baby began to drink on instinct, unaware that the milky liquid was slowly destroying his small body. And then Natasha began to speak, her voice a whisper, but Victor's camera captured every word clearly, and what Amelia heard made her clamp a hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. "I'm sorry, my love," Natasha whispered, her voice trembling as if she were holding back tears. "But this is the only way. Do you understand? When you're healthy, your father is never home. He goes to meetings. He goes to see dangerous men. He does things I'm not allowed to ask about. He looks right through me as if I don't exist." Natasha pressed a kiss to Mason's forehead. "But when you're sick, your father stays home. He cancels every meeting. He sits by your crib for hours. He talks to me. He looks at me. I need him to see me. Do you understand? I need him to love me the way he loves you." Tears streamed down Amelia's cheeks, not out of pity for Natasha, but out of horror at what she was witnessing. A mother poisoning her own son just to earn her husband's attention. A cruel distortion of love and loneliness. "I don't want you to die," Natasha went on, sounding as if she were trying to convince herself. "I just wanted you to be a little sick, just enough to keep your father at home, just enough to make him worry, but you keep getting thinner, you keep getting weaker, and I don't know what to do. I can't stop. If I stop, you'll get better, and your father will disappear. I'll be invisible again." Mason finished the bottle, his eyes already closing, and Natasha placed him back in the crib, standing there for a long moment, her face blank. Then she slipped out of the room in silence. Amelia sat on the bed, her phone still in her hand. The video had captured everything, from the moment Natasha poured the drug into the milk to the terrifying confession she'd whispered to her child. This was the proof. This was what Amelia needed to show Damien the truth. But before she could do anything, she had to make sure Mason was safe tonight. She rose and stepped out of her room, intending to go to Mason's room to monitor him after that poisoned bottle. But she didn't know Natasha hadn't truly left. She was standing in the hallway's darkness, and icy blue eyes were fixed on Amelia. Amelia had barely stepped out of her room when a hand grabbed her wrist and yanked hard, dragging her into the hallway's darkness. She tried to scream, but another hand clamped over her mouth, and when her eyes adjusted, she saw Natasha Castellano's face inches from hers, those blue eyes no longer cold, now burning with a terrifying madness. "You heard," Natasha hissed through her teeth, her voice no longer sweet but pure hostility. "I know you're watching me. I saw you holding your phone. You recorded me, didn't you?" Amelia struggled, but Natasha was stronger than she looked. The strength of someone cornered, the strength of desperation. Natasha snatched the phone from Amelia's hand, glanced at the screen, and saw the camera app still running, her face twisting with fury. "Who do you think you are?" Natasha growled. "You think you can come here and ruin my life? You're just a broke little doctor from Brooklyn. You're nothing." Amelia bit the hand covering her mouth. Natasha screamed in pain and let go, and Amelia immediately shouted, "You're killing your own son. You're sick. You need help." "Shut up," Natasha screamed. "I'm not sick. I love my child. I'm doing everything for love. You don't understand. No one understands." Natasha lunged at Amelia, both hands grabbing her shoulders and shoving hard. Amelia staggered backward, her foot caught on the carpet, and she fell onto her back, her spine slamming into the stair railing. She tried to cling to the banister, but Natasha was already in front of her, blue eyes flaring like fire in the dark. "You won't take everything from me," Natasha shrieked, then shoved Amelia again with all her strength. Amelia felt her body lose balance. Her grip slipped from the banister, and then she fell. The marble staircase spun in front of her as she tumbled down, each step a brutal impact against her shoulder, her back, her head. Amelia tried to cry out, but the breath had been knocked from her lungs. She only heard the dry crack of bone as her arm slammed against the edge of a step, and then her head struck the marble floor at the base of the stairs, with a sharp, sickening sound. The world lurched. Pain exploded in her skull like a bomb, and Amelia saw Natasha's silhouette at the top of the staircase, looking down at her with a blank face. The last thing Amelia thought before darkness swallowed her was the phone, the video evidence. She hoped Victor had gotten the signal. She hoped Mason would be saved, and then everything sank into nothingness. Blinding white light was the first thing Amelia became aware of as she slowly opened her eyes, her head pounding like it was being split with a hammer and her throat burning dry as if she hadn't had water in days. She blinked a few times, trying to make her vision settle, and little by little she realized she was lying in a hospital bed, her left arm in a cast and suspended high, her head wrapped in bandages, and the steady beep of a monitor sounding beside her. She tried to remember what had happened: the dark hallway, Natasha, the struggle, the stairs, and then the memory crashed back like a wave that stole her breath. "Mason," she rasped, her voice hoarse. "Mason. He's safe now." The low, familiar voice made Amelia turn her head, and she saw Damien Castellano sitting in the chair beside her bed, his face so drawn she almost didn't recognize him. Rough stubble on his jaw, gray eyes shadowed from lack of sleep and rimmed red as if he'd been crying. Something Amelia had believed impossible for the most powerful mafia boss in America. "Victor found you at the bottom of the stairs," Damien said, his voice heavy and exhausted. "Your arm is broken. You have a mild head injury. The doctors said you're lucky it wasn't worse." Amelia tried to sit up, but the pain in her skull forced her back down. "The video," she said. "The phone." Natasha took it. "I've already seen the video," Damien said, and Amelia realized his voice trembled slightly. "Victor backed up all the footage from the hidden camera into his system before you installed it. He sent it to me the moment he found you injured. I watched everything, from beginning to end." He paused, drawing in a deep breath as if trying to hold something in. "I heard what she said to my son. I heard her confess to all of it." Amelia looked at Damien, and for the first time she didn't see the terrifying Mafia king. She saw a man falling apart, a father who just uncovered the most brutal truth imaginable. "My wife poisoned my son," Damien said, his voice catching. "She almost killed Mason just because she wanted my attention. She watched him grow thinner every day, watched him suffer, watched him cry, and she kept giving him poison. How can a mother do that to her child?" Amelia didn't know what to say. She lay there in silence, watching the most powerful man in this city shatter in front of her. "Where is Natasha?" she asked at last. "Arrested," Damien replied. "I called the police right after I watched the video. For the first time in my life I called the police, instead of handling things my own way. But this is my son. This is my wife. I didn't know what to do." He bowed his head, both hands covering his face, and Amelia heard a sound she never thought she'd hear from Damien Castellano, the choked sob of a man carrying too much pain. "She confessed to everything," Damien said through broken breaths. "When the police came, she didn't fight. She just sat there and told them everything. About the loneliness, about how she felt invisible inside her own home, about how she only wanted me to love her the way I love Mason. She said she didn't want to kill him, she just wanted him sick so I'd stay home. But he kept getting weaker, and she didn't know how to stop." Amelia closed her eyes, feeling tears slide toward her temples. "This is Munchausen by proxy," she said softly. "A mental disorder where someone harms the person they care for to gain attention. Natasha isn't a monster. She's sick. She needs treatment." "Don't defend her," Damien snapped, surging to his feet, his voice suddenly sharp again. "She almost killed my son. Sick or not, I don't care. She'll pay for what she did." Amelia looked at him and saw the conflict in those gray eyes, caught between whatever love he'd once had for his wife and the hatred for what she'd done to their son. "How is Mason now?" Amelia asked, trying to steer the conversation. "He's being treated in pediatrics," Damien replied, his voice softening when he spoke of his son. "The doctors say he's dehydrated and severely malnourished. He needs fluids and monitoring for at least a week, but he'll make a full recovery. Because of you." He looked at Amelia, and his gray eyes held something she'd never seen from him before. Real gratitude. "You were right from the start," Damien said. "You saw what 15 other doctors didn't. You weren't afraid to stand up to me. You weren't afraid to speak the truth, even if it could have gotten you killed. Why did you do all of this? Amelia met his gaze and managed a faint smile despite her cracked, dry lips. Because Mason is an innocent child, and no child deserves to endure that. I'm a doctor. My job is to protect the most vulnerable, no matter who's harming them. The days that followed moved like a chaotic storm for the Castellano family. Mason was transferred to the pediatric unit at Mount Sinai, the best hospital in New York, and a team of doctors cared for him around the clock. The 7-month-old lay in his hospital crib with an IV line taped to his tiny arm. But after only 3 days of treatment, the color had returned to his skin. His eyes looked brighter, and he began taking his milk without diarrhea anymore. Amelia was discharged after 5 days, her arm still in a cast and her head still wrapped in bandages. But she insisted on visiting Mason every day, checking his condition, and guiding the nurses on how to care for him. Damien almost never left the hospital. He slept in the chair beside his son's crib, canceled every meeting, handed all business to Victor and his most trusted associates, and for the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss on the east coast of America let his empire run without him, so he could focus on the only thing that truly mattered. Natasha was taken to a state psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. Damien's lawyers made sure she wouldn't be released on bail while awaiting trial. The charge of severe child abuse could keep her in prison for many years, even if her mental illness was considered. Damien filed for divorce on the 3rd day after Natasha was arrested, and the news spread through the underworld like wildfire. That was when the real trouble began. Ivan Volkov, Natasha's father and the leader of the second most powerful Russian mafia family in New York, called Damien one evening while he was sitting beside Mason's crib. Victor handed the phone to his boss, his face tight with tension, and Damien knew at once this wouldn't be an easy conversation. "You put my daughter in jail." Ivan Volkov's voice came through the line, heavy with a Russian accent and thick with threat. "You let the police arrest your wife. You let the whole world know my daughter is insane. You think you can humiliate the Volkov family like that without paying for it. Your daughter almost killed your grandson," Damien replied, his voice ice cold. "She poisoned Mason for months. If Dr. Harper hadn't found it, my son would be dead. You should be grateful. I called the police instead of handling her myself." Ivan let out a short laugh, humorless. "Natasha is sick. She needs to be treated within the family, not in prison. You've broken the alliance between our families. You've turned us into enemies. We were never real allies," Damien said. "You forced your daughter to marry me to strengthen your power. And now that she's no longer useful, you pretend you care about her. Don't be a hypocrite with me, Volkov." Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Ivan's voice turned darker. "You'll regret saying that, Castellano. And that little doctor who stuck her nose into our family business. She'll pay too. I'll make sure of it." The line went dead, and Damien sat in silence, watching his son sleep peacefully in the crib, unaware that a war had only just begun. He called Victor in. "Increase security for Mason, and find Dr. Harper. From now on she needs someone watching her 24/7. Volkov threatened her. Victor nodded and left, while Damien remained alone, staring out the hospital window at the city lights glittering in the night, and he wondered whether he had the strength to protect both his son and the woman who'd saved his life. 3 weeks passed, and Mason recovered in a way that felt almost miraculous. The 8-month-old had gained nearly a kilogram. His cheeks were filling out again. His gray eyes, like his father's, now sparkled instead of sitting hollow and exhausted as before, and his laughter rang through the Castellano mansion like music this house had been missing for far too long. Amelia visited Mason every day at Damien's request. At first she thought it was only to check the baby's health, but little by little she realized those visits had become the thing she looked forward to most in her day. Maria returned as a full-time nanny. Damien tripled her pay for the loyalty and genuine love she showed Mason, and the mansion carried a different atmosphere now. Lighter, warmer, as if Natasha's ghost had been driven out. The conversations between Amelia and Damien began with short exchanges about Mason's condition, then gradually stretched longer, deeper, more intimate. The first night, Damien asked her about her work at Brooklyn Hospital, about the patients she treated, about why she chose a public hospital instead of expensive private clinics. The second night, Amelia asked him about his childhood, about the father who was assassinated when Damien was only 18, about the burden of taking control of an underworld empire while he was still so young. They sat in the great living room after Mason had fallen asleep, firelight from the hearth dancing across their faces, and Amelia realized that beneath Damien Castellano's cold, ruthless exterior was a lonely man A man who'd never been allowed to be weak, never been allowed to trust anyone completely. "You're the only one who isn't afraid of me," Damien said late one night as they sat side by side on the sofa, Mason sleeping soundly in his room, and Maria on the night shift. "From the first moment you walked into this house, you looked me in the eye and said what no one else dares to say. Why?" Amelia was quiet for a moment, watching the flames in the fireplace. "Because I've already lost everything," she said softly. "People only fear when they still have something to lose. I've been an orphan since I was 8. I grew up in foster care. I was moved through 7 different foster families. I'm used to not belonging anywhere, to having nothing. So, I'm not afraid of losing anymore." Damien watched her, and his gray eyes softened in a way Amelia had never seen. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met," he said. "And I've met a lot of people who claim they're strong. Mafia bosses, gunmen, killers. But none of them compare to you, a small doctor from Brooklyn who dared to stand against my entire empire to save a child you didn't even know." Amelia felt heat rush to her cheeks and she quickly turned away so Damien wouldn't see it. "I was just doing my job," she said, her voice smaller than usual. "No," Damien said, and his hand unexpectedly touched her chin, gently turning her face back so she had to meet his eyes. "You did more than that. You almost died for my son. My wife pushed you down the stairs. And even after that, you still came to see Mason every day, even though no one was paying you. Don't tell me it was only your job." Amelia's heart raced so fast she thought Damien might hear it. The space between them was only a few centimeters. She could catch the faint scent of his expensive cologne, could see the pale scar cutting through his left eyebrow, could look into gray eyes fixed on her with a feeling she didn't dare name. But then her phone vibrated in her pocket, shattering the moment, and when she glanced at the screen, her heart dropped to the bottom of her stomach. A message from Mount Sinai, about Lily. Her condition was worsening. The surgery needed to happen within a week, and Amelia still didn't have enough money for the deposit. She stood up too quickly. "I'm sorry. I have to go," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to handle." Damien looked at her with concern. "Is something wrong? Can I help?" "No," Amelia said fast. Maybe too fast. "It's nothing. Just work at the hospital. I'll come see Mason tomorrow." She left before Damien could ask anything else. And all the way back to her damp studio apartment, she wondered why she hadn't told him about Lily, why she hadn't asked for help when he could clearly solve her financial problem with a snap of his fingers. Maybe because she didn't want to become someone who lived on favors from a mafia boss. Maybe because she was afraid that if she took his money, whatever was forming between them would change. Or maybe because she'd carried everything alone for so long she didn't know how to let anyone help her anymore. It was a late night, 2 days after Amelia rushed out of the Castellano mansion. She'd just finished a night shift at Brooklyn Hospital and was walking out to the parking lot behind the building, her mind spinning with worry for Lily and thoughts of Damien she couldn't shake. The lot was empty near midnight, only a few staff cars scattered under pale yellow lights, and Amelia didn't notice the black van parked near the exit until it was too late. She'd just unlocked her beat-up Honda Civic when a rough hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Another arm wrapped around her waist and lifted her clean off the ground. Amelia fought, tried to scream, but the hand over her mouth was too tight and she was dragged toward the van before she could do anything. The van door swung open. She was thrown inside, her head striking the cold metal floor, and before she could see her attackers' faces, a coarse cloth bag was pulled over her head, plunging her into complete darkness. When the bag was yanked away, Amelia didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe a few hours, or the whole night. She only knew she was sitting on a wooden chair in a damp room that looked like a basement, her hands bound tight behind her back, and in front of her stood a tall man with white silver hair and eyes as cold as ice. Eyes she recognized at once as the same eyes as Natasha's. "Ivan Volkov," he said, as if introducing himself at an elegant party instead of in a kidnapping cellar. "Natasha's father. And I'm sure you've heard my name, Dr. Harper." Amelia didn't speak. She held his gaze, forcing her face to stay still while fear churned inside her. Ivan smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're the one who destroyed my family. You're the one who got my daughter arrested, who stained the Volkov name. You think you can do that without paying for it." "I only saved a child who was being poisoned," Amelia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your daughter is the one who did that, not me." The slap came fast and hard. Amelia's head snapped to the side, her cheek burned, and she tasted blood in her mouth. "Don't you dare talk about my daughter that way," Ivan snarled. "Natasha is sick. She needs treatment within the family, not in a prison. And you took that right away from us." He motioned to the two men standing behind him, and they stepped forward, fists raining down on Amelia without mercy, into her stomach, her chest, her face, each blow a wave of pain crashing through her body. But Amelia didn't scream. She bit her lip until it bled and didn't let a single sound escape. She'd endured too much in her life to be broken by a few punches. "Now," Ivan said when the men finally stopped, "you'll call Damien Castellano and tell him that if he wants you alive, he needs to free Natasha and hand over all of Eastern Manhattan to the Volkov family." Amelia spat blood onto the floor and looked Ivan straight in the eye. "No." Ivan tilted his head, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "What did you say?" "I said no," Amelia repeated, her voice hoarse but firm. "I won't help you threaten anyone, and I sure won't help you free a woman who almost killed her own son." "Who are you to defend Damien Castellano?" Ivan shouted, his face red with rage. "Do you even know what he is? He's a monster, a murderer, a crime boss." "I know he's a father," Amelia replied, "and I'm his child's doctor. That's all that matters." Meanwhile, back at the Castellano mansion, Damien was like a caged beast. Victor reported Amelia missing at dawn. When the guard assigned to watch her found her Honda Civic still parked in the hospital lot, the door hanging open, her keys on the ground, and no sign of her anywhere. Damien shattered the glass table in his office when he heard. He called every contact, pulled every resource, threatened and bought off anyone who might know anything. "Find her," he ordered Victor, his voice more dangerous than Victor had ever heard. "Tear this whole city apart if you have to. I don't care how much money it takes or how many bodies it costs. Find her and bring her back to me." Victor looked at his boss and saw something burning in those gray eyes. This wasn't only a father's gratitude toward the doctor who'd saved his child. This was something deeper, stronger, more frightening. "Boss," Victor said carefully, "she's just a doctor. Don't risk the entire empire for one woman." Damien turned on Victor, and the look in his eyes made even his most loyal guard take a step back. "She saved my son's life," Damien said, his voice low and unwavering. "She's worth me setting the whole world on fire to bring her back." It took 18 hours of ripping information out of every source in the underworld before Damien finally found where Ivan Volkov was holding Amelia. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Brooklyn, once a Volkov meatpacking facility before it was shut down a few years earlier, and now a place to keep enemies Ivan wanted to deal with in silence. Damien didn't wait, didn't draw up a careful plan, didn't negotiate. He gathered 20 of his most loyal men, armed them with heavy weapons, and moved out into the night. Victor sat beside him in the lead SUV, checking his pistol one last time. "Boss, this could be a trap," he said. "Volkov knows we're coming. He might already be ready." "I don't care," Damien answered, his voice cold as steel but his gray eyes burning with a fire Victor had never seen. "If I have to walk through hell to bring her back, I'll do it." The convoy stopped about 200 meters from the warehouse, and Damien signaled his team to fan out and encircle the building. The late-night darkness hid them as they moved closer, and Damien could see light leaking through boarded windows, could hear the guards outside talking. He signaled Victor, and in an instant the two guards were taken down in silence, throats cut before they could make a sound. The raid began. Damien kicked the front door in and drove inside, the gun in his hand roaring as he dropped 2 Volkov men in the entry. Gunfire exploded everywhere. Bullets fell like rain, and Damien's men surged in like a tidal wave. Volkov's crew fought back hard. They had the advantage of the layout and they were prepared, but they hadn't expected Damien Castellano to lead the assault himself with a brutality that made even seasoned killers flinch. Damien pushed toward the stairwell that led down to the basement, shooting anyone in his way. No hesitation, no mercy. Blood sprayed the walls. Bodies sprawled across the floor. But he didn't slow, didn't look back. There was only one goal in his mind. He kicked the basement door open and saw her. Amelia strapped to a wooden chair, hands tied, her face marked with bruises and dried blood, but her green eyes still wide and fixed on him in shock. And Ivan Volkov stood right behind her, one hand fisted in her hair, yanking her head back, the other pressing a gun to her temple. "Stop, Castellano," Ivan shouted, panic cracking through his voice now, the confidence from before gone. "Take one more step, and she dies." Damien halted, his gun still raised, gray eyes locked on Ivan with pure hatred. "Let her go," Damien said, his voice low and slow. "Let her go, and I'll give you a quick death." Ivan laughed like a madman. "You think you've got the upper hand. If you kill me, this girl dies with me." Damien looked at Amelia. and she looked back at him, and there was no fear in her eyes, only absolute trust, like she knew he'd save her, no matter what it cost. And that was all Damien needed. He fired, not at Ivan, but at the hand holding the gun, the bullet tearing through Ivan's wrist, ripping a scream from him as the weapon clattered to the floor. And before Ivan could react, Damien crossed the room, slammed him down onto the concrete, and pressed the barrel to his forehead. "You dared to touch her," Damien growled, his face twisted with rage. "You made her bleed. This is for my daughter," Ivan hissed through clenched teeth. "You ruined her life." "Your daughter ruined her own life when she poisoned her own child," Damien said coldly. "And you ruined your life the moment you put your hands on my woman." The final gunshot rang out, and Ivan Volkov lay still on the cold concrete floor, a bullet hole between his brows. Damien rose, went to Amelia, and cut the ropes from her wrists, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the bruised skin. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice catching. "I came too late." Amelia looked at him, her swollen lips forcing a small smile. "You came," she said, her voice hoarse but warm. "That's the only thing that matters." Amelia woke in a luxurious hospital room, afternoon sunlight slipping through the window curtains, and the first thing she registered was the ache spread across her body, from the bruises on her face to the places her ribs had darkened from the Volkov men's fists. She tried to piece together what had happened. The rescue, the gunshots, Damien carrying her out of that blood-soaked basement, and then her body giving out in his arms on the way to the hospital. When her eyes adjusted to the light, she saw Damien sitting in the chair beside her bed, still in the black suit now wrinkled and marked with dried blood, his beard rough with stubble, his gray eyes bruised with exhaustion as he watched her with a feeling she couldn't name. "You're awake," he said, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't slept in days. "You slept almost 24 hours. The doctor said you were depleted and needed rest." Amelia tried to sit up, but pain forced her back down, and Damien rose at once, gently supporting her and settling her against the pillows with a carefulness she'd never seen in him before. "Mason," she asked, her voice raw. "How is Mason?" "He's fine," Damien said. "Maria's taking care of him at home. He misses you. He keeps asking where Dr. Melia is all day." Amelia managed a small smile, even though her lips still hurt. Then she looked at Damien with worry. "And you? Are you hurt? That raid?" "I'm fine," Damien said, sitting on the edge of her bed instead of the chair. "I'm used to things like that, but you almost died because of me, because of my enemies, and it made me realize something." Amelia looked at him, her heart quickening without her permission. "Realize what?" Damien was quiet for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then he met her eyes with a sincerity she'd never seen from the most powerful mafia boss in this city. "I've lived 36 years, he said, his voice low and slow. "I've killed people. I've built an empire on other people's blood and tears. I married for alliance, not for love. I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew what I wanted, until you showed up." He lifted his hand and touched her bruised cheek gently, with a tenderness that made it feel like she was the most precious thing in the world. "You're the only person who isn't afraid of me. The only person who dares to look me in the eye and tell the truth. The only person who sees me not as Damien Castellano, the mafia boss, but as a lonely man trying to protect his son. You changed me, Amelia, and I love you for it." Tears rose in Amelia's eyes before she could stop them. Not from pain, but from the words he'd just spoken. Words she'd never believed she'd hear from anyone, especially not from someone like Damien. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice shaking. "You don't know how much debt I'm in. You don't know I have a sister who's dying slowly from cancer and I don't have the money to save her. You don't know how broken I am." "I know," Damien said, and Amelia stared at him, stunned. "I know everything," he went on. "From the first day you came into my house, I had someone look into you. I know about the $250,000 of debt. I know about Lily. I know about the surgery you couldn't afford." "Why didn't you tell me?" Amelia asked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I was waiting for you to let me help," Damien replied. "But you're too stubborn. You're too used to carrying everything alone that you don't know how to let someone share the weight with you. So I decided for you." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it in her hand. "Your student debt has been paid in full, and Lily had her bone marrow transplant 3 days ago at Mount Sinai. The surgery was a success. She's recovering very well, and she asks about you every day." Amelia stared at the envelope in her hand, then up at Damien, and she broke, not silent tears, but a sobbing cry like a child who'd held too much for too long and was finally allowed to fall apart. "Why?" she asked through the sobs. "Why did you do all of this for me?" "Because you deserve it," Damien said, drawing her gently into his arms. "Because you've given me more than anyone ever has. You gave me my son. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to become better. And now I want to spend the rest of my life paying you back. If you'll let me." Amelia cried in Damien's embrace, feeling the warmth and steadiness of him around her. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she belonged to someone. 1 year later, the Castellano mansion had completely changed. No longer the cold, shadowed fortress it had been the first day Amelia stepped inside, but now filled with the laughter of an 18-month-old boy toddling everywhere on chubby rosy cheeks and bright, glittering gray eyes. Mason Castellano had fully recovered, with no trace left of the months he'd been poisoned. A healthy, energetic child who loved Amelia with his whole small heart. Every morning when Amelia walked into his room, Mason lifted both arms to be picked up and called out "Mama," and her heart melted. He didn't know she wasn't his biological mother, and to Amelia it didn't matter, because love never needs shared blood to be real. Lily had recovered completely after her bone marrow transplant, the 22-year-old now living with them in the mansion, studying nursing at a prestigious university with Damien covering all tuition, and every day she played with Mason as if they were true siblings. Amelia still worked at Brooklyn Hospital. She turned down Damien's offer to open her own private clinic, because she knew the poor children of Brooklyn needed her more than anyone. But now the hospital had been fitted with the most modern medical equipment thanks to a donation from the Mason Foundation Damien created, a foundation dedicated to supporting pediatric patients and mothers suffering from postpartum depression. Damien had changed a great deal over the past year. He was still Damien Castellano in all his power, still running his empire with an iron hand, but he'd handed most underground operations over to Victor and focused far more on legitimate business. He came home every evening to eat dinner with Amelia and Mason, read stories to his son before bed, and learn how to become the man Amelia deserved. Natasha was being treated in a psychiatric facility and was making positive progress. Doctors said she'd begun to recognize and accept what she'd done, and Damien allowed her to visit Mason once a month under strict supervision, not because he'd forgiven her, but because he believed Mason had the right to know his biological mother when he was old enough to understand. It was an autumn evening, when the leaves in the mansion garden were turning a blazing gold and orange, that Damien led Amelia up to Mason's room, the place where they'd first met more than a year ago, the place where she'd seen a frail baby on the edge of death and decided she'd do anything to save him. Mason slept soundly in his crib, small lips slightly parted, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, healthy and peaceful the way every child deserves to be. Damien turned to Amelia, his gray eyes warm in the soft light, and then he knelt in front of her. Amelia opened her mouth to speak, but Damien had already pulled out a small black velvet box, lifting the lid to reveal a diamond ring glittering inside. "You saved my son," Damien said, his voice low and full of feeling. "You saved me too. You taught me that power means nothing without love. Money can't buy peace, and even the darkest souls deserve redemption, if they're willing to change. Now let me spend the rest of my life loving you, protecting you, and building a real family with you. Amelia Harper, will you marry me?" Amelia looked at the man kneeling before her, the man this entire city feared, and yet now he was looking at her with eyes full of hope and worry, like a boy waiting for the answer to the most important question of his life. She glanced at Mason sleeping in his crib, the child she'd saved and now loved as her own. Then she looked back at Damien and smiled through happy tears. "I don't need you to protect me," she said gently. "I don't need you to give me money or power. I just need you to love me for real. And if you can promise me that, then yes, I'll be your wife." Damien stood, slid the ring onto Amelia's finger, and pulled her into his arms while Mason continued sleeping in his crib, unaware that he was about to have a new mother, a mother who had once risked her life to save him. Sometimes a guardian angel doesn't arrive with white wings and a glowing halo. They come with a worn stethoscope, dark circles under their eyes from sleepless nights, and a brave heart that won't quit. And sometimes, even the most powerful bosses, the men the entire underworld trembles before, can find redemption in the love of a poor doctor from Brooklyn, a woman who sees the real person behind the cold, ruthless shell. This story teaches us that money and power can't buy real love, that sometimes the people who heal us aren't expensive specialists, but simply those who dare to look deeper than appearances, that anyone can change if they meet the right person and are willing to open their heart and that love has the power to heal every wound, no matter how deep. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share this video with the people you love, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more touching stories every day. We'd truly love to know how this story made you feel. Did it bring anything in your own life back to you? Have you ever met someone like Amelia? Someone who stood up for what was right even when facing danger? Or have you ever witnessed someone change through love the way Damien did? Leave a comment and share what you feel from the deepest part of your heart. We always read and cherish every single line you write. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. We wish you and your family strength, a life full of joy and peace every day. See you again in the next video.